Hello, my name is Faye Toogood. I'm an artist, a designer, a mother, an obsessive and an explorer. So studying art history for me was really important. I didn't study design, so often I feel like I can't call myself legitimately a designer. I was more in the fine art and the history of art. I went to university and studied that, and it was the way of looking, the way of observing the world, looking at composition, I guess the social context of the world in which those paintings or art pieces were created. I think it was understanding, I guess, the layering behind things. It made me inquisitive in the world, and so it also meant that I didn't have any rules. You know, I didn't study design, so that meant I didn't have to approach design in the same way, with the same eyes, with the same agenda. So I came at design with a more free way of looking at things, I guess. And then when I was older, it was actually Tom Dixon that turned around to me and said, you need to stop throwing things in the bin and you need to start making objects permanently in the real world. And that stuck with me. So after studying the history of art at university and fine art, I was lucky enough to get a job at the World of Interiors magazine. It was where I learned everything about space, interiors, materials, architecture, design, fine art, antiques. You know, it was all in one bucket, and there was no hierarchy to objects, whether they were an 18th century teapot or something somebody had made out of paper, or a squat in London or a palace in Sweden. Everything was treated with the same reverence, and I think it also made me realise that things were not about trend and fashion in that sense. It was much more connected to people and humanity. And it also taught me how to be experimental. You know, we had very small budgets working on magazines, and so we had to create a sense of place. We had to create environments out of very little. It was also a place, I think, you know, intellectually, where a lot of people were quite passionate and academic about what they were interested in, so we got to meet some really fascinating people, as well as go to some incredible places. So I went to Mali in Africa on a shoot, Rajasthan in India. You know, these were at the age of 25 to go to these places and have that influence was huge. And it was really, I think, by the end of the 8 years, I realised that I was probably, if I didn't go at that point in my late 20s, I was probably going to stay for many years. But I was getting frustrated with a two-dimensional page and wanted to do something more three-dimensional. And I think there was just that breaking out feeling where the magazine would arrive after 3 months of being published, and I wouldn't feel anything. And I wanted to have more of a connection with people and to have a context with the work that I was producing. So it was at that point that I decided that I would move from, I guess, 2D to 3D and start making objects with no real plan. And I started on my kitchen table. So starting my own studio in my late 20s, you know, was challenging. I really didn't have so much work, so I was continuing to do some styling work for magazines. But I set the studio up because I couldn't find another place that I wanted to work. Everywhere seemed to be specialising in one area at the time, whether that was interiors or graphics or sculpture or fashion design. And I was interested in all of those things. And so I felt that the studio was going to try and represent all of this. In a way, create a playground for myself, a safe container for freedom and creativity where I could work on anything I wanted to with no real boundaries, and working in any medium, with any discipline, and with any industry. So I think I already knew at that point that I wanted to blur the boundaries between fine art, design and fashion, and it took maybe 10, 15 years before I really got that. My very first collection I guess shows that in a way, because I came to London Design Festival and I had a collection of furniture made out of wood, but I displayed that against bags that I'd made out of old binocular cases that I'd collected, and then there was a huge mushroom installation that also included a cafe, and then the whole environment was scented with this really pungent woodland fragrance. And at the time, that multidisciplinary way of approaching design hadn't really happened. You know, now it's very much part of the way we include space and design, and we involve everything together. But at that point, I guess, to present all of those elements together was not something that was really happening in design. For me, art and I think sculpture probably have the biggest impact on my work, and that dates back to when I was probably 7 or 8. My parents took me to the British sculptor's Barbara Hepworth's studio in Cornwall, and I was just completely mesmerised by her work. The sculptural nature of it, her very hands-on approach. There were these fantastic pictures of her carving away at huge blocks of stone, this very strong woman against these huge pieces of monumental stone, and it just had such a profound effect on me. And I remember leaving her studio thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to make sculptures and objects, and it just was there right from the very beginning. I think influences are an interesting thing. I know that when I was growing up, I had one person that was very dear to me, an old lady that I grew up with. She was similar to a grandmother, and she would take me to these old houses. She had a real interest in art and design, and I think she really opened up my world in a way that I don't think would have happened naturally. Yeah, growing up as a female designer, you know, I was in my late 20s when I started working in design. I hadn't trained in design, so this automatically felt like I was on the back seat. I hadn't gone to one of the famous schools in London on design, so I wasn't really part of the scene. I was working on the outside in a way. But I was really passionate about making objects, and I think instantly, I very quickly felt that it was difficult as a woman to be taken seriously. So I decided not to work in textiles, I decided not to work in colour, and I decided not to work in the decorative arts in any way. I was going to work with heavy materials, I was going to work with a more linear subject matter in terms of the geometry, and I didn't want my gender to come into the equation at all. So even at that time, I remember journalists requesting interviews around being a woman in design, and I wouldn't take them because I didn't really want that to be considered. So I guess in that sense, I'm second wave feminist, and now there's this amazing group of third wave feminists that are young women that are acknowledging their femininity, and they're using that in a world where finally we're accepting of that. And I can definitely see the shift from when I was 27 to now I'm nearly 50, and that the way that I view myself in design is completely different. And I think it's a fantastic moment to be able to finally take on colour, finally take on decoration, take on small objects in a way that now I feel that will be taken seriously in a world that previously I did not. And I think what's exciting for me is to watch the way that female design actually is going to be taking over design generally in this industry. So my first collection, in fact, I couldn't call it a collection. I guess I didn't feel quite confident enough to call it a collection, so I called it an assemblage. I felt that was probably closer to what I was doing in my work, in the sense that I was kind of editing and curating and bringing things together and working with existing forms. So I was working a lot with sort of quite pure geometry at the time. And I was trying to find my own language, my own way of working, you know, having not trained in design, I needed to find my own way of working. And so I called them assemblages, and they still are called assemblages today. So I'm working on assemblage 9 right now, but we started all those years ago on the very first assemblage, which was a group of very pale, quiet wooden pieces of furniture that were really beautifully crafted. And I presented them and made them for London Design Festival, but I didn't really think about what I was going to do with them afterwards. So there was no strategy or logistics plan or a way how I was going to make them, manufacture them. So in a way, it didn't go anywhere. It was just the start. It was kind of the start of making. But then very quickly I realized that what the design world is waiting for is for you to kind of give across your identity and give across your style and your taste. And so there were articles and reviews of my work which instantly kind of put me into a bracket that I didn't feel comfortable with. So the second assemblage came very quickly after the first and was very much a reaction to that first assemblage. And I shaved off all my hair. I made everything out of steel and black steel, and we were working with welding at the time and security mesh. And it was then what had started as a very soft, almost natural collection, then moved into something very hard, linear, and maybe could be described at the time more masculine in its approach to materials and shape. My very latest collection, Assemblage 8, is actually my first collection of upholstery. And I think, for many years I've been focusing on form and geometry and shape, more the sculptural side of my work, and probably to the detriment of comfort and function. That wasn't certainly in my younger days, wasn't a preoccupation. I really wanted to kind of change the way that form and geometry could be looked at in furniture and in design. So I would say in the last 2-3 years, my preoccupation has moved to soft goods. So things that are more feel and look soft, but also, are actually soft. And so this upholstery collection includes a chair called Gummy. So normally to get all of those shapes, you would work with foam. But I've actually worked with a traditional English manufacturer who normally works on, reproduction. That was the challenge. How can I create a really contemporary modern shape, but work with a very traditional and important, natural, traditional way of working in upholstery? So I've recently produced a homeware collection called Dough, which is a collection of ceramics, and I guess whether it's a coat, a chair, or a bowl, everything is approached in a very similar way. Everything starts with the hand, so it's very rare that you'll find many drawings from me or the studio. They do exist, but they probably exist more in terms of paintings. And then we go straight to form making. So there's always a lot of clay, paper, wire, there's a lot of making that goes on in the studio. And sometimes these maquettes, these small models that get made, just sit on the shelf for some years, and then after some time they become relevant, and a maquette is picked off the shelf, and then that becomes the starting point for a project. And that was the way it was for Dough ceramics. Those were clay pieces that had been worked on that then became the right starting point for a whole collection of ceramics, which I think is very important that it feels right. They're everyday pieces to be used all the time, and I think a lot of the time people are thinking about the way they look rather than the way they feel. And for me, is very much about putting your hands around the clay and feeling how it feels in the morning. When you're using the bowl or the jug or the cup, it's got to be in there, the tactile quality. I think a lot of people know about the design and more the interior side of what we do at the studio, but not everyone is perhaps aware of the fashion and the clothing that we work on. And actually that has become one of the main parts of the business. It started maybe 10, 12 years ago, working with my sister on some clothes that we wanted to make for our friends. They were just to be with no brand, no obvious connection to fashion, just clothes that you could work in, clothes for creatives, other artists. So they were for like-minded people, you know, irrespective of age, irrespective of gender, irrespective of size. And I'm proud to say that that very much still exists for the clothes now. It started off as 8 coats, and now we have the full collection, and we're sold maybe in 100 different stockists around the world. But it's very much about finding a uniform for creatives, and it's something that, you know, I think we're both very proud of. The studio is made up of 25 people at the moment. I've always kept it small. It's important to me. You know, there have been many times when we could have taken on projects and jumped to 50 or 100, and actually I've really refused that, because I need to be involved in everything that we do. Maybe from a controlling point of view, but not just that, just because I actually really enjoy it. It's something I want to be hands-on. It's the reason I'm doing it. So to feel disconnected from the final product or feel disconnected from the final project would not bring me joy. And the reason I'm here is to bring joy to others around me, but also for myself. You know, I feel like if I'm in a good working place, in a good sense, then the work that I produce will be good. So we are a small studio and we work across all the disciplines, but I think what's exciting is that different designers get to work in different areas of the business. So a fashion designer will always have a kind of comment and will be included in on upholstery, for example. They're very much their knowledge on how textiles works or how something is fabricated or a pattern is really relevant to something like upholstery, and then vice versa. So you might find someone from a fine art background contributing to something on the clothing side. So it's that cross-pollination that I find really interesting, and I personally like to work with others. The act of collaboration and the act of working with others makes me more of a designer than an artist, I guess. You know, I'm looking for a challenge, I'm looking to solve a problem to a certain extent, even if I have to find that problem myself. It is a problem that I'm trying to solve, rather than needing to just sit in a room on my own and create work from a personal perspective. I very much like working with people, for people. So collaborations is such a big part of Too Good Studio, and we're lucky enough to have worked with, on the fashion side, Birkenstock and Carhartt, more recent collaborations that we've worked with, along with eyewear. We've worked on glasses, shoes, quite wide in terms of our collaborations, but also on the interiors and the design side, brands like Tacchini and Poltrona Frau, CC Tappi on the rugs. You know, these brands are Italian brands predominantly who are working very much at the top of what they do. The way that they produce, the way that they create, the way that they design for themselves has been something that I have personally connected with. And I think when you're doing collaboration, you have to have that connection. Otherwise, the end result doesn't work. And I find that those collaborations that work the best, there's been an initial connection, a human connection there, before we even start discussing product. Yeah, so in the early days, I was working a lot, before we started making clothes ourselves, you know, I was working quite a lot with other fashion brands, including Comme des Garçons and Vivienne Westwood and Hermès, for example. These were brands that were coming to the studio to find a new way of presenting things, a new way of looking at the world. And I feel that we are now able to do that, but we're also able to do that in connection with our own clothing. So we're kind of having a whole three-dimensional view on design is something that I find very exciting. So collaborations are always so exciting because they change things. They change things within your own house, within your own four walls. You have to look out, so you have to understand how others work, but also you have to allow people to come in. And I think just that way of inhabiting somebody else's world for a moment means that certainly our designers here, they grow. You know, we find new ways of working, we find new experimental ways of working. We also get to work with craftsmanship on a completely different level. You know, when you're working with collaborators that are specialists, then you really get to push your own boundaries as well as their boundaries. And I think that's why we're there. That's why we do it, really, because we like to push those boundaries. It's interesting thinking about, you know, when you look back on your career, I mean, I still very much feel like I've started. But then when you look back and you count up the years, there's many years of working, and I still feel like I've still got so much more left to do. But looking back, I can see there were times that when it wasn't easy. One time I particularly remember it was at the time when I launched Roly Poly. I'd had my first child, and I'd found that difficult, having my own studio and becoming a mother for the first time. And I guess it forced me to acknowledge that I was a woman, and up to that point I hadn't really, you know, taken that into account, really, in terms of design and in terms of the way I presented myself and my identity and my work. But then it became very clear that that was going to become a very important part of my life, and that needed to become part of my creativity. So that's when I put out the Roly Poly collection. And actually for 2 years, the collection really didn't even get looked at. It was, you know, not even acknowledged. It was completely alien in terms of its geometry and form in comparison to everything else at the time, which was very linear, marble, brass. It was clean, I would say. And this collection was completely the opposite. And that was hard, you know, that I had to be brave enough, I think, in order to follow my own conviction that my instincts were right, that I was actually putting something out there that was relevant and was interesting. But it took time, and I do find that often sometimes the world is not quite ready for what I have to present, and so that can be quite challenging. So for me, coming to Paris and Maison et Objet with World Manifesto is really important, because it's about, not only is it about the back catalogue of my work, obviously it's an exhibition, it's a very personal display of things that have come out of my studio, out of my archive, things I'm working on right now. You know, there's a sense of vulnerability, I guess, when you come and you exhibit your work in this way. But it's more than that. I think it's also about the challenges, you know, that rewriting the manifesto that I wrote to myself when I was younger, understanding the challenges that I am facing now and that I have faced. And some of those are around, have been around my gender, and some of those have been around what it's been like to, you know, design and produce as a woman, but also in the UK. And those are, you know, challenging aspects of what's going on right now. Now I finally feel very comfortable to say that I am a female designer, and that feels good to say that. So coming to the installation, I'm hoping that people will get a really great sense of the work that the studio produces, you know, across design, across the collectible design and art, across fashion. You know, I think some people are aware of some of the dimensions of which we work in, but maybe not all of them. And there's nothing I like more than being able to put it all together and to feel more of a kind of holistic way of working. So I really feel that in the installation you should feel the multidisciplinary nature of the studio. The future for design is very exciting. I mean, I think all of us don't know what's coming. You know, we know that AI is coming, and we know that probably AI will probably be able to design a better Faye Toogood chair than I will be able to design it. So that is not really it's not really the challenge. The challenge, I think, is to actually create with emotion. So I will be focusing on finding materials and ways of working that allow me to connect with people's emotion, because I know that a computer can't do that. And it's something that I've been trying to do over the last few years and understanding more and more. But what is it that gets someone connected with an object? Why are they connecting more with that object and not with this one? And I believe it's because this one has more of a human context within it. It's got someone's emotion within it. I know when I put more into my design work, more of myself into something, somehow that's imbued in the object, it comes out. So I will be looking for new ways of working that allow me to get closer to humans, for people to kind of connect deeper to the objects that I make, rather than trying to solve a functional problem, because let's face it, we don't need more chairs or new design in that sense, we have enough. So why is it that people want new things? Why is it that they want to be inspired? And I believe that we as human designers can do that probably better than a robot at this point.